It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for tonight. We're having a doubleheader. The meeting tonight is dedicated to the memory of Jack Ordille. I knew Jack, I probably only was in his company a few precious times, but I was on the phone with him all the time. And the conversations would go like this. Jack, I hope you don't mind. Jack, if you can, and Denise will talk all about Jack, but I have to tell you that he was one of the most gracious people I ever knew. And nothing was too much. As he was a stockbroker. He had this passion of the weather, and of course his son that took prime time in his life, and still every time you called him, you had the feeling at the end of the conversation that the best thing that happened that day is that you called him and bothered him to give you or send you all this information. So it's I admired his abilities. When he talked about weather to me, he was most of the time way over my head. He was so far advanced in that. But he was just a great guy, and we want to acknowledge that tonight. So, but with that, I never really knew his wife, and I found out that she's also one exceptional lady. And so my time with her and preparing for tonight, I've been been overwhelmed by her abilities and her skills. So with that, I'll introduce the first speaker for the night, Denise Ordille.
Good evening. Thank you for attending. My name is Denise Ordille, and tonight's topic is the weather history of Hammonton and a tribute to Jack Ordille. Jack Ordille, my husband, was originally scheduled to deliver this presentation last April. Jack passed away in November of 2010. Tonight I'm speaking on his behalf and in his honor. Jack had already prepared a portion of the presentation he planned to give, and sections of tonight's discussion will be his words. First, some background on Jack. Jack had a lifelong interest in weather. His mother tells the story of when he was less than 2 years old and terrified of a thunderstorm. In order to calm him down, his mom pulled out the childcraft books and read to Jack about thunderstorms, wind, and other weather phenomena. After that, Jack was hooked. As a preschooler, he used to wake up at 5 a.m. to go out and get his father's newspaper and discuss the weather with his neighbor. Jack's kindergarten teacher remembers how much Jack loved to be chosen as class weatherman. Where other students would give a 1 or 2 word weather report, Jack gave a full report, including wind, type of clouds, temperature, etc. Jack went to Hammonton Elementary and High Schools, where he led Hammonton Weather Central and provided daily weather reports over the loudspeaker each morning. He called a major snowstorm in elementary school that all the professionals missed. He insisted to his classmates that there would be a snow day, and everyone laughed. Sure enough, there was a huge snowfall that night. Jack was annoyed and said the pros used the wrong weather model. In his preteen years, Jack maintained handwritten weather logs for fun. I have some of the logs over here on display. You're welcome to take a look after the presentation. His personal digital weather records date back to 1998. And in 2003, he became a cooperative observer for the National Weather Service. I'll get into a little more detail about that shortly. Jack also took many college-level courses for weather, both at Stockton College and online. In April of 2007, Jack decided to turn his hobby into a career. He, along with 2 other weather professionals, launched a weather business called Storm Vista LLC. In 2008, he became sole owner. And now, even after his death, his legacy lives on. I have assumed ownership of the company, and my partner, Commodity Weather Group, based in Bethesda, Maryland, is the operational and marketing backbone of the business. I'll speak more about Storm Vista later this evening as well. First, some general information about Hammonton's long history of weather data. Weather is the day-to-day state of the atmosphere, but once we begin to discuss the long history of weather records, it becomes climate history. Our first precipitation records for Hammonton go all the way back to 1891, but did not become consistent until 1908. In November of 1930, temperature records were added. Data is taken by volunteers, known as cooperative weather observers. The National Weather Service, or NWS, Cooperative Observer Program, called COOP for short, is truly the nation's weather and climate observing network of, by, and for the people. More than 11,000 volunteers take observations nationwide. The program's mission is twofold. First, to provide observational meteorological data consisting of daily maximum and minimum temperatures, snowfall, and 24-hour precipitation totals required to define the climate of the United States and to help measure the long-term climate changes. And second, to provide observational meteorological data in near real time to support forecast, warning, and other public service programs of the National Weather Service. Each morning, co-op observers record high and low temperature for the prior 24-hour period, the current temperature, how much precipitation fell, if any, and what time it occurred, and make special notes or observations if any certain meteorological phenomenon occurred. I report each morning at 8 a.m., while some observers may report at 7 a.m., midnight, or even in the afternoon. What is important is that each observer reports at the same time each day, whatever time that may be for their particular station. The data is collected several times per hour and reported once per day, unless conditions warrant more frequent updates. Co-op observers are also trained to measure snowfall and snow depth, which are two very different measurements. I'll explain why. Snowfall has to be measured at a minimum of every 6 hours when snow is falling. The snowfall collects in the standard rain gauge and must be melted down to get a liquid equivalent. Snow depth, on the other hand, is measured once a day. Before it snows, the co-op observer places a white National Weather Service snowboard on a level piece of ground. When there's snow on the ground, the snow depth is measured by putting a measuring stick into the snow over the area of the snowboard and recording the depth. All reported data is official climate data used by the media, the National Weather Service, and anyone else that would need climate data, including those who monitor climate change. The Hammonton Co-op station actually has a long history. Mr. Bill Parkhurst and his family are responsible for much of the climate history and weather data for Hammonton, as he and his family recorded data for generations. The station was started in 1930 by Bill Parkhurst's father, W. Hubbard Parkhurst, a cooperative weather observer. Mr. Parkhurst owned a pesticide company in the 1930s and had a vested interest as well as a passion for weather. W. Hubbard Parkhurst recorded the weather in Hammonton for more than 40 years. Bill Parkhurst continued the work of his father by taking over operations and becoming a cooperative observer in the 1980s. Starting on May 12th of 2003, Jack became the official cooperative climate observer for Hammonton. Jack was trained both as a cooperative observer and a skywarn severe weather spotter. After his passing, I became trained and am now Hammonton's cooperative observer. Jack's enthusiasm for weather was infectious, and I'm proud to keep his station going by reporting data each day to the National Weather Service. Maintaining a station with such a long history is an honor and needs to continue. Co-op observers record data a little differently than the TV news, and Mr. Parkhurst and Jack, and now me, also use different instrumentation. Out of the 11,000 plus co-op observers nationwide, most don't actually use a calendar day for recording weather. Our weather day is reported for the 24-hour period, ending at a consistent, designated time each day. It does make our record keeping slightly different than the major stations, but for Hammonton, it's always been this way, so it's apples to apples. All data then and now gets sent to the National Weather Service in Mount Holly, who then sends it to the National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, North Carolina. Mr. Parkhurst used an instrument shelter with a min and max thermometer and a standard National Weather Service rain gauge. The rain gauge, which I also use, is a metal cylinder with a funnel on top and a plastic measuring tube in the middle. The measuring tube can handle up to 2 inches of rain before overflowing into the larger outer cylinder. During the winter, as mentioned earlier, the rain gauge is used to collect snow. The observer removes the funnel and inner tube and allows the snow to collect in the outer tube. The observer then melts the snow and measures it, getting an accurate water equivalent to report. Another piece of co-op equipment is the anemometer, which is mounted on the roof of my house and measures wind speed. All weather data is communicated from the instruments around my house to my Davis Vantage Pro, which then sends the data to my PC every 5 minutes. And over here I have pictures of some of the equipment that I'm speaking about that you can take a look at as well. Equipment used at National Weather Service cooperative stations may be owned by the National Weather Service, the observer, or by a company or other government agency, as long as it meets National Weather Service equipment standards. Once a co-op location is set up, the National Weather Service visits at least once a year to look at the equipment and ensure it's still meeting their standards. I'll get to some interesting weather statistics for Hammonton shortly, but I do want to touch on climate, which is a real hot button topic. I'm sure everyone has heard of global warming. There's no disputing that the Earth has warmed. The disagreement comes when the topic of why is introduced. Many governmental agencies, including the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, attribute the warming solely to an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere due to man. However, the other side, which is often silenced, actually has stronger data to support that man is not causing the majority of the warming. There are many factors that influence climate. Here's a brief list and explanation solely in Jack's words. Number 1, ocean currents, like the North Atlantic Oscillation, or NAO, and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, or PDO, can be thought of as El Niño or La Niña on a multi-decadal scale. A positive PDO is associated with warming. In 1977, there was a sudden switch to a positive PDO. As some may remember, the winters right around that time were quite cold, snowy, and severe. It was almost like a winter capitulation. These cycles last about 30 years on average, give or take, and may be switching to the cooling phase right in this time frame. The North Atlantic Oscillation also operates on a multi-decadal signal, and the negative phase is associated with more snow and cold in the eastern U.S. The negative phase switched positive in the early 1980s, after a long period of severe negative values, namely in the 1960s. That negative NAO and negative PDO combination led to much below normal temps and above normal snowfall for many of the years of that decade, and was in part responsible for the magazine articles that were forecasting the next ice age in the mid-70s. Number 2, change in the Earth's rotation. The Earth, over very long periods of time, changes its rotation and does wobble. Those seemingly small changes over time do influence the amount of insolation the Earth receives. Winter is the shortest of the 4 seasons at only 89 days. It is also getting shorter by several seconds per year. Many might remember when the first day of spring would sometimes fall on March 22nd. Recent articles have discussed how it will only be on March 21st for years to come. Number 3, sunspots. This doesn't get talked about enough, but is a major factor, and when given some thought, is very logical. The output of the sun varies, and a stronger output means more insolation and warming. Sunspot cycles last about 11 years. When they are very active, it tends to coincide with warming, with a lag time, of course. When there are 2 consecutive cycles with very low sunspot activity, that is called the Maunder minimum, and it coincided with the last little ice age. A new solar cycle recently began, and 2008 set a record for most consecutive days without a sunspot being observed. I think it was 57 days, which is very unusual. If the sun's output remains low for this cycle and the next, global cooling will be the issue. Number 4, brightness of the Earth. An article was written a couple of years ago that talked about how successful we have been at cutting pollutants, and it has been seen in satellite pictures, where the Earth has appeared brighter. Maybe not a big factor, but anytime you can increase the sun's strength, it could have an effect. One other topic that has been all the rage with global warming is the Atlantic hurricane activity. Again, there's a multi-decadal signal, usually lasting 20 years or more, and has been observed back to the 1800s, called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC, also known as the Gulf Stream. This signal flipped positive in 1995, and named storms are running much above normal since then. Jack had done studies on this oscillation and integrated El Nino and La Nina into it, since they also affect hurricane activity. His study showed that El Nino and La Nina was actually not the most important influence. It was the AMOC, or Gulf Stream. El Niños produce fewer named storms in the Atlantic. Jack's study showed that when the AMOC was positive and there was an El Nino leading into hurricane season, we averaged 11 named storms versus 7 during the negative phase. That's a big difference. Many say that hurricane activity has increased due to global warming. This actually is not true. What has happened is that there have been more storms in the Atlantic, but fewer in the other basins. So the net number is not that much different on a worldwide basis. There are ways to measure energy output of all cyclones worldwide called an ACE score. Even though the Atlantic was very active in 2008, the worldwide ACE score was the lowest in 30 years. These are things that don't get discussed much when discussing changing climates, and climate is always changing. It always has. Jack had been in many debates on the topic, and there's one question he asked that no one who solely blames man has ever answered. His question was, over the last 100,000 years, we have documented many occurrences of temperature and carbon dioxide spikes based on collected data. There were no cars or machines back then. How can one be sure that this time is different than all the other times? Yes, the Earth has undergone warming even more rapidly than now, and it has coincided with carbon dioxide increases, which is found in minute amounts of the atmosphere. The medieval warm period actually saw temperatures several degrees warmer than we have now. Interestingly enough, there was an article in the Washington Post on January 27th of this year, in which 16 scientists joined together to argue that there is no need to panic about global warming, stating that there is no compelling scientific argument for drastic action to decarbonize the world's economy. I could practically hear Jack speaking in that article. For discussion on weather and climate specific to Hammonton, one's first thought may be to tie this into agriculture since we are a farming community. There is very interesting data on this based on the climate change that we have witnessed. Many might be familiar with growing zone maps, and I have those over here as well. The USDA put one out in 1990, but the data was from 1974 to 1986, which actually is insufficient data. Climate data should always be a minimum of 30 years. On that map, we were in zone 6, which meant that our average yearly low temperature was between 10 below and 0 degrees. If we look at the zone map for 1976 to 2005, we are actually in zone 7 now, which shows a low temperature range of 0 to 10. Quite a change. It also means that our average first and last frost and freeze have changed, meaning a little longer growing season. Farmers who've been doing this all their lives will not be surprised at all to hear this, I'm sure. And this has happened nationwide, of course, not just here. But the warmer temperatures have been a net plus for farmers. Now for a brief timeline to highlight some interesting facts pertaining to Hammonton's weather data. The date of Hammonton's latest snowfall was May 8, 1947. Snow covered the ground that evening. My father-in-law told Jack the story of how it was on the ground when he was leaving the movie theater. The next to last date of the last snowfall was May 1st, 1963. Hammonton's hottest day on record was 105 degrees on July 4th, 1966. The date of the earliest snowfall in Hammonton was October 10th, 1979, when 2 inches fell. On August 21st, 1993, an F2 tornado was confirmed with Jack's assistance, with winds of 113 to 157 miles per hour that touched down just northwest of the Hammonton Lake. Hammonton's average yearly snowfall is about 17 inches, with a record high of about 65 inches in 1995. 2007 was a very unusual year, with 80-degree or higher temperatures every month from March to October. In March of 2007, Hammonton had an official temperature range of 76 degrees. Early that month, Hammonton set 3 records for cold and later set records for high temperatures. Hail is a relatively rare event, but on January 11, 2008, we had a hail thunderstorm. Hammonton's average yearly precipitation is about 45 inches. August of 2011 was a record high month when 21.55 inches of rain was recorded in that 1 month alone. It has been said that when you can turn your passion into a profession, you will never have to work a day in your life. In 2007, Jack turned his lifelong weather passion into a business when he launched Storm Vista LLC. For 3+ years, Jack poured his heart and soul into his new business. I'm proud to say, thanks to the help of my partner, Commodity Weather Group, that Jack's hard work is paying off and we are carrying on his legacy. Storm Vista continues to grow and succeed. In March of 2011, the company was featured in the business section of the Atlantic City Press. Initially, Storm Vista started by providing a one-stop shop for weather enthusiasts and hobbyists. Then it progressed and became a resource to individuals and companies with significant economic risk due to the weather. Storm Vista's clients are meteorologists, private forecasters, utilities, hedge funds, big banks, investment companies, large food companies, and weather hobbyists. For the weather professional, we offer platinum service levels as well as corporate and professional packages. For the weather hobbyist, Storm Vista provides personalized local forecasts from the National Weather Service to your community. We buy raw weather data from the Weather Service in the United Kingdom and convert that into usable weather maps for our clients. And I have some examples of some of the maps on the presentation board as well. We generate nearly 500,000 maps a day from every weather model, including our very own weather research and forecasting model, run to 180 hours in the future in 3-hour increments, which means that you can look at forecasts out to 180 hours or 7.5 days from the present time and see maps for this time period in 3-hour increments. We have designed our tables and products with the end user in mind for top quality, ease of use, and at delivery speeds that are very hard to beat. Storm Vista frequently has the fastest delivery of dynamic weather model guidance. Our global forecasting system, or GFS, is on par or better than any other major vendor, and soundly beats NCEP, National Centers for Environmental Prediction, to the end of the run. We offer intermediate steps to see model changes faster. We have 3-hour time steps for all of our North American mesoscale short-term forecasting and GFS numerical weather prediction computer models. The GFS is shown over the US, Europe, South America, Africa, India, China, and Australia. Storm Vista provides unique views with daily updates of critical El Niño sectors. Some of these include products that you might not find anywhere else, if at all, like our El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO graph, which shows the last 30-day anomalies of all the ENSO regions. Another feature of Storm Vista is real-time model updating. Our model tables never need manual or auto-refreshing. You can watch the table dynamically build with the forecast hour appearing as the maps become available. Customers who hedge risk based on weather forecasts, such as agriculture, energy, etc., depend daily on these real-time maps. Our midday change predictor is the earliest AM update and shows how the GFS should change at market-sensitive midday. All periods and days are available. Our 4-panel plots allow users to compare key features of one model, like forecast maps and change from previous model maps in one spot. Mouse over functions enable you to quickly jump to different hours or stop at a certain point. Looping features can be slowed or accelerated. The Live Start button allows you to watch a model arrive as soon as Storm Vista receives the data. Storm Vista, along with partner and distributor Commodity Weather Group, aims to be the market leader in rapid, high-quality weather model analysis and delivery to weather-sensitive industries. Current customers include J.P. Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank, Direct Energy, Cargill, Constellation Energy, Con Edison, Bonneville Power, Total Energy, Louis Dreyfus, The Washington Post, and many more. Capital Weather Gang, bloggers from The Washington Post, were recently listed as number 38 on the list of the 50 most powerful people in Washington. Those bloggers are degreed meteorologists who use Storm Vista's maps in their blogs. I hope tonight's discussion helped show the unique and long weather history of Hammonton. Hammonton's history started with W. Hubbard Parkhurst sitting in the strawberry fields on frost nights and telephoning weather warnings to local growers, and has grown to where we are today, where real-time weather data feeds to my PC every 5 minutes, and my husband's first-class weather business emerges as the industry leader to weather professionals. I'm grateful to all who have been part of this interesting history, and I'm excited to be part of it. I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much, Denise. Yeah, normally at this point we have question and answers, but I think that what we'll do is, that if it's okay with you, we'll wait till after Keith, and then we'll do it then. And that was awesome.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in this doubleheader is a gentleman I've known for 30 years. He's been Mr. Meteorology at Rutgers. Keith got his bachelor's from King's College, and then his master's from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, where he got his thesis was in meteorology. And he ended up in 1982 in Rutgers, and where his main commitments today are in weather advisories, weather climate summaries, and of course teaching. And I think his last class today was at 5 o'clock, so we appreciate Keith coming. We used to speak to Keith every morning, six days a week. He would call in the old-fashioned days, and he would call, and we would give him the weather data over the phone. So with a great pleasure that I introduce from Rutgers, Keith Arnesen.
Thanks, Bill. Denise, you're a hard act to follow. Good evening. My name is Keith Arnesen, and I'm here at the invitation of Bill Parkhurst to honor Jack and to talk a little about the history of weather observations at Hammonton. I did not know Jack personally, but I think Denise did a great job in giving me insight into who Jack was and his passion for the weather. It's interesting, Jack's story sounds pretty familiar to mine and a lot of the students that we have at Rutgers that major in meteorology. Talk about Jack's mother, talking about when he was a little boy. My mother used to do the same thing. I had a few things that really bugged her, and one of them was I grew up in Staten Island, and I was, you know, I always tell people I came out of the birth canal with an interest in the weather. You know, it's. But after advising all the freshmen that hopeful wannabes at Rutgers for meteorology, I realized that our stories have a lot of similarities to them. A lot of majors, you have college students that start at Rutgers and they say, what are you going to major in? I don't know. You know, and then when they're a sophomore, well, I changed it from last year, you know, and they're on the search. But for the majors of meteorology, it's not that way. They know for a long time, most of them, there's a few that are different, but most of them for a long time, they just had the passion for the weather. So what did I do that really bugged my mother? Well, growing up on Staten Island, we were on a dead-end street, and I was a snow lover. I just love snow. I know a lot of you say, okay, it's weird, right? but that's the way it was. And if there was an impending snowstorm when I was a kid, our front door was one that was mostly wood except for these little slotted windows about this height. And so there was a street light down at the next house. And if I was waiting for the snow to begin, I would have to get up and look out, and my nose would touch up against the glass, and I would leave these smudge marks on the glass. And so my mother the next morning, she had the smudge marks, and she knew that I was waiting for snow to begin. So. Now, over the years, my job description has changed considerably and has taken on a much increased teaching role and advisor as advisor to the incoming freshman meteorology students. So I get to hear their stories, and like I said, there's a lot of commonality there. When I arrived at Rutgers in the fall of 1982, fresh out of graduate school, I really didn't know what I was getting into. I'd left a good job in my family, except for my wife and 3-month-old, to go out from Staten Island to South Dakota, Rapid City, South Dakota, to go after my passion, to become a meteorologist. And that was not an easy thing to do, but one that we never regretted. And upon completing my master's, I immediately started to seek employment. Now, since a lot of you are here because you like history, you might remember that the late 70s and early 80s was a period kind of similar to now, not quite as bad as today from the employment standpoint. We're going through a severe recession, so there weren't a lot of opportunities out there. But Rutgers made this offer, this position, and I jumped on it and started off my new career. Now that particular position was on a grant from the National Weather Service to become an agricultural meteorologist. And being naive and desperate, because the salary was really poverty level, I accepted the position. And the duties included, among other things, teaching a course in agricultural meteorology and issuing twice daily agricultural weather advisories and keeping track of the climate in New Jersey. It was that responsibility that brought me into contact with Bill, and I didn't know much at the time and therefore just followed the simple training I was given by my predecessor, which included calling every Monday morning 20 locations around the state to get 7 days worth of weather information, Hammonton being one of those stations. Well, the data was then input into a very sophisticated, complicated computer program that then would compute various averages and values of temperature, precipitation, growing degree days, soil moisture, and all the departures from normal, etc. It was here that I realized the value of having individuals who were dedicated to accurately collecting and sharing consistent meteorological data. There's not enough money in budgets to have numerous National Weather Service stations across the state with paid personnel 24/7. So at that time, there were 2 offices in the state, one at Newark and one in Atlantic City. The one in Mount Holly was actually the former Philadelphia office that when they went through modernization, they moved that whole complex and built a new one in Mount Holly, where they presently reside. And as I'm sure you know that Newark and Atlantic City does not describe accurately the entire climate of the state of New Jersey. So you depend upon these observers at these co-op stations to help fill in the gaps in the data. And so it's a very important and critical need that is filled by these observers. Now let me digress to my graduate school days before coming to Rutgers to show the importance of having timely and accurate and evenly, closely spaced stations for weather gathering information. It was my first semester in graduate school. And part of the reason why I chose South Dakota was my wife was from Nebraska. Nebraska didn't have a program in meteorology. South Dakota did. So I figured, I drug her all the way from Nebraska to the wilds of New York City for our first few years of marriage. So figured if the few years I was going through graduate school, if I could get closer to her family, that would be better. So South Dakota was the closest deal. It wasn't close, but it was closer. We went to her parents' house, about a 9-hour trip, her sister's house, about a 7-hour trip, and so forth. So now it's the first semester, and it's Thanksgiving break, and we're planning to go visit her family for Thanksgiving. So now there was a storm coming out of the Rockies. Now, keep in mind, this is 1979. So the state of weather forecasting was in the Stone Ages in many respects. But there were a few stations available across Nebraska and South Dakota that I could get some information for. And so we knew that the storm was coming, and so instead of leaving right after classes on Wednesday like we'd originally planned, I figured, in the dark and everything, it wouldn't be good. Let's just wait till first light, and I'll take a look at the situation and we'll make a call. Well, Rapid City only got a dusting of snow. And then I looked at the surrounding stations and all through our path, and 2 inches here and 1 inch there. Now keep in mind, if you've never been out in that part of the country, you have no idea what traveling is like. It's not like around here where, oh, okay, well that road's closed, I'll just go out of the ways, a few miles down here and go around. Just very sparse main roads. So we're on one of those main roads, and suddenly that dusting of snow turned into about 2 inches of just packed ice. Pins and needles driving. Then we finally get to this one location where I see, and very poorly traveled or sparsely traveled roads. There was a little rise in the road, and there was a vehicle stopped. So I come up behind him, and I don't know why he stopped, and then I saw why he stopped, because down at the bottom of the hill was a tractor-trailer truck that had jackknifed right across everything. And so, okay, now what are we going to do? Like I said, it's not like go back 1 mile, go up 1 mile, and it wasn't going to happen. So we ran into, at the bottom of that hill, 13 inches of snow. Didn't know it was there because there weren't enough stations around reporting the data. So it's really important to have these stations that will report their data on a reliable and regular and a timely basis. So at the time, the National Weather Service, so I started a professional relationship with Bill and a number of other weather observers around the state. And then in early 1990, Bill decided it was time for him to pack it in as a co-op observer. And at the time, the National Weather Service couldn't find a replacement for him, and so the station disappeared from the publication and from observations. Now, also at the time, there were some other higher tech things coming online. One system you might have heard of, RISE, started automated weather stations, and the state climatologist's office at Rutgers started putting in some automated stations. And so some were put in Hammonton, so I just started collecting data there. Trouble is, they've had some trouble in and out, and it was only recently that I suddenly realized that you were back online, so now I'm using you again. So, but when Bill called me last year about my willingness to come and talk, I thought, well, it's the least I could do for all the years of, providing me with the data to provide the products to the state and to the agricultural community of those different values. But as the time got closer, I was thinking, when Bill first asked me, he said, could you do this? And he mentioned Jack's name, and he said, and he was one of your former students. And now I'm not good with names, and I teach a lot of undergraduate classes that are not only meteorology majors, they're just people getting science requirements out of the way and so forth. To give you an idea, one year my high water mark was 700 students. So I'm not good on names. And so when I'm on the phone with him, I'm trying to say, okay, I don't remember this name, but that's not unusual, so I'll just fake it and I'll look him up. I couldn't find him anywhere, and then found out it was the Stockton he went to. So I felt I was a little off the hook that not remembering his name. But as I said, Denise did a great job in filling me in because Bill had forwarded me her remarks that she was going to say. So I had an idea what she was going to say because I didn't want to just repeat and be redundant with what I want to share with you. But as I started looking for some information from a historical standpoint about Hammonton, I started coming across some interesting little tidbits. Now, some of them are not strictly about Hammonton, but they appear in the New Jersey Weather Bulletin of years ago. And so I'm going to share some of those with you, and you might find them a little amusing. The first publication I could find online was 1884, and it's New Jersey Weather Review. And there were only about a dozen stations back then, and things started to change after that. So if, you want to look these over later on, or you want to keep them or burn them or whatever, they're just copies from offline of the originals, but you're welcome to have them. Some other things that that I looked at was in the New Jersey Weather Service. This is the monthly review of 1892. This is a monthly. Look at this thing. It was a book. I'm thinking, wow. And it gives all sorts of information in there, and acknowledgments of publications. It says, William Earl Case, Esquire, Director of the New Jersey Weather Service during the year 1884, has presented the central office with his very valuable meteorological library, also much interesting data covering a period of several years, which include observations of the barometer, thermometer, hygrometer, rain gauge, and direction of the wind at Newark, New Jersey during the years 1880-1884. The gift is highly appreciated, and Mr. Case will please accept our thanks. Our acknowledgments are also due to the editors of the following newspapers, which are regularly received at this office: the Monmouth Democrat, Freehold; the Record, Tenafly; Hunterdon County Democrat in Flemington; the Unionist Gazette in Somerville; the Jerseyman in Morristown; the South Jerseyman in Salem; the Press in Keyport; the Courier, Toms River; the Daily Home News and Times in New Brunswick. Many interesting and valuable meteorological items are found in the columns of these papers and made a matter of record. So the early days, they depended upon a lot of newspaper accounts of what was taking place to fill in for the lack of any information. But you might appreciate this one. This was out of, the month was December 1892, and this was reported by James Shulin, and for Hammonton. And he said, "The past Christmas was the first white one we have had in several years. The ice harvest is completed, having secured a fine quality 5.5 inches thick." Isn't that hard to imagine nowadays? That by Christmas, you have 5.5 inches of ice to harvest, for the ice industry. Back then there were no refrigerators. It was the old ice boxes, and so, what did they do if they had a winter like we have now? By the way, I just computed New Brunswick's today average temperature for this winter, and it wasn't our warmest ever. That was 1889 to 1890. And it was a 40-degree average. We did come in fourth place, though, out of 125 years. So we don't define winter as the astronomical, December 21st to March 21st approximate period. We just call winter December, January, February. And so it's easier computing averages on that basis. So those are some interesting tidbits. And then this is out of the third annual report in 1892. At the close of the year in 1891, the number of stations displaying the daily forecast was 28. During the year 1892, this number, through the very great liberality of the chief of the National Weather Bureau, has been increased to 50. The Bureau has also furnished free of expense a full set of signal flags to all stations. I don't want to read everything that's in these, but January 1893, another comments from the observer at Hammonton. The exceptionally cold weather of the month proved disastrous to blackberries and peaches. A large percentage of the blackberry wood is killed. One peach orchard is reported as having the buds all killed and the new wood for 10 to 12 inches, while others are not hurt to any extent. My question is, how come they didn't mention blueberries in there? You know, so blueberries the capital, right? But are there still blackberries here?
Very few.
Very few. That's interesting. It was a major industry then, or that was just a hobby of his, and
No, berries were a very high quality crop shipped out of Hammonton.
okay. So at one time it was a good industry. Huh?
Yeah.
The early days of the National Weather Service really go back to the telegraph days, and it's kind of interesting history because when the telegraph service was just going nationwide, the head of the Smithsonian Institute decided that he was going to issue weather instruments to all the telegraph operators. And the telegraph usually would not be up 24/7. So whoever was the guy in charge would sign on in the morning. And so they told the individuals, please take readings of the weather, and as you sign on, share what your temperature and what the weather conditions are. And that spread and was actually the kind of the infancy of the National Weather Service back in the mid-1800s. And so then it became part of the Signal Corps, which was actually part of the military at the time. And it was interesting how they displayed the weather back then. It's going to be a little hard to read in this light, and this print is so small, but it says the chief signal officer furnishes, when practical, for the benefit of the general public of those industries dependent on a great extent upon weather conditions, indications which are prepared at 1 a.m. for the 24 hours commencing at 7 a.m. These weather forecasts are telegraphed to many signal service stations, railway officials, and others, and are so worded to be readily communicated to the public by the means of flags or symbols. The flags adopted for this purpose are 4 in number and a form and dimensions indicated. A white flag, 6-foot square white flag, but that was hoisted up. That meant clear or fair weather. Number 2 is a blue flag. It was also 6-foot square, and that indicates rain or snow. And then number 3 was black triangular flag, 6 feet by triangle shape, but 6 feet on the long side and 6 feet in that direction to make the triangle. That would indicate the temperature. And if no temperature change was expected, then they wouldn't hoist that flag. Number 4 was a white flag with a 6-foot square with a black center, and that indicated a cold wave. And so they'd hoist these flags in combinations up a pole for people as they were walking by, whatever combination, and they put one color above the other meant it was going to be cold getting warmer, or warm getting colder, and so forth and so on. So it's kind of an interesting transition in that respect as well. Then the general in charge of the Signal Corps, his name was General Hazen, turned ill. He was, this was February 1887, and General Hazen, Chief Signal Officer of the United States Army, died of diabetic coma in January 16th at Washington. He suffered from diabetes for some years, but had of late had improved in health and strength, and hope was entertained of his complete recovery. At the reception to the diplomatic corps given by the President, he took a severe cold, causing him to keep his bed on the 14th. Kind of interesting way of wording it, right? Keep his bed. I guess it was say he stayed in bed that day. And on the 15th, he was better, feeling better, and said, I'm going to go into work on Monday. And then says Monday found him dead. So that wasn't a good ending there. But then they replaced him, and as part of the replacement, they decided that they were going to transition now this responsibility from the military into the civilian type of operation. This is the New Jersey Weather Chronicle. This is April 1888. March 1888. Does March 1888 ring a bell to any of you weather enthusiasts? Yeah, the Great Blizzard of 1888. That was the one I was waiting to revisit in my lifetime. I think we've had a couple that kind of get in that category. But that was when the state of New Jersey introduced a bill to create its own department within the state to fund it, to find observers, and to organize in a more meaningful manner. Every once in a while they put a little scolding in there. It says tardy reports. We would urge those of our observers who are in the habit of holding back the reports for several days after the close of the month, of which they are of record, to forward them promptly. By the 5th of January, we had received reports from only 44 stations. This tardiness on the part of a few greatly delays the early issue of the bulletin. It is our desire to publish the data at the earliest date practical, and this cannot be done without prompt and hearty cooperation of the observers. So we even had some of those laggards back then. And then it put some interesting bits of information as well. How strong is ice? Okay, the strength of ice. The Army rules are that 2-inch thick ice will sustain a man, or properly spaced infantry. 4-inch ice will carry a man on horseback, or cavalry, or light guns. 6-inch ice, heavy field guns, such as 80-pounders. 8-inch ice, a battery of artillery with carriages and horses. But over 1,000 pounds per square foot on sleds, and 10-inch ice sustains an army or an innumerable multitude. Bet you didn't know that. Then they also had one about figs. I'm thinking, figs? What's that doing in the climate of crops of New Jersey section? But it was very interesting, and runs a little bit on time here, so I'll just kind of summarize what that article was about. They decided, really good figs come from the Mediterranean region. Why can't we grow them in parts of the United States that taste as good, but for some reason they don't? And so they found that there were some wild figs that the growers over in the Mediterranean would put a branch in their cultivated trees, and in those wild ones there was some insect that would then cross-pollinate the other variety, and that's what gave it the good flavor. And so they had to replicate that, because the United States can't be behind anybody else, so you have to be bigger and better. So. But as I scroll down through the information, this is what I came up with for the Hammonton station. Denise has touched on some of these. The first listed observer in 1892 was James Shulin, and only precipitation was measured in those early years. He was replaced in 1894 by George Elvins. Now, I don't know if any of you know any of these names, if they're familiar, and you say, oh yeah, that was my uncle or my grandfather, or... So in 1894, George Elvins, who continued to record Hammonton until 1901, when he was replaced by H.M. Bunnell, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but Elvins became the observer for a new station in Tuckerton. H.M. Bunnell continued to record the data until January 1907, when Hammonton disappeared from the data. In January 1908, Hammonton reappeared in the publication with Orville Bassett as the observer, And that lasted until March 1917, when a name I know you will recognize, G.H. Parkhurst, Bill's uncle, I believe, right? Became the Observer. G.H. Parkhurst continued until January 1921, when Charles Phillips became the Observer, and continued until December 1929, when Hammonton once again disappeared from the publication. I don't know, perhaps a casualty of the Great Depression. But then a year later, in October 1930, Hammonton reappeared, and this time temperature was added with the precipitation, and the Observer's name was Mrs. Annie Measley, and she continued until 1934. In May of 1934, George Lobley became the Observer, but only briefly until 1935. And then in October 1935 began the longest Observer to date, when J.G. Wilson took over and continued until August 1953. That was almost 18 years. J.G. Wilson was briefly replaced by Byron Davis in September 1953 through February 1954. Then in March 1954 started the long tenure of the Parkhurst family. It was listed in the publication as W. Hubbard Parkhurst and continued through February 1990. Bill gave me the lowdown in the family when I said, I'm a little confused here. Who's who? Because it doesn't seem to change. And so this is Bill's response to me. My grandfather, William Hubbard's son, was William Hubbard Jr., but went by W. Hubbard, and I am William Hubbard III. All right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. I suspect that the 36 years of observations were split between you and your dad.
Well, my father, as long as he could do it.
Okay. The station disappeared from the publication in March 1990 and reappeared in 2003 when Jack took over and became the Observer until his death, at which time his wife Denise took over the observations and continues to the present. So, that's all I got to say. And if you have questions
Yes, anybody, thank you, Keith,
Yep.
all the plugs. Okay, and so anybody at this time, any questions for Denise or Keith? Denise, anybody you want to introduce here, or your family?
Oh,
or-
my whole family's
All right.
here. Jack's mom and dad are here, sister, my parents, pretty much a whole family, cousins, aunts, and we really appreciate everyone's support. A lot of friends and pretty much all my friends and family.
Big crowd.
So, yeah, appreciate it.
Any questions for Denise?
Very good. Thank you, Denise.
Okay. For Keith?
That was a clear presentation. Appreciate it.
And
You
the
good?
only other
We
thing
still-
is there are some, the National Weather Service in Mount Holly donated some items up here for giveaways, so help yourself. Any of the mugs and pens and keychains over here are for any of you to take compliments to the National Weather Service.
And Keith, we still have fig trees in Hammonton.
Yeah, I know some of my neighbors on Staten Island, they used to wrap it every
Still do.
winter,
Still do.
and I never saw them really harvest any figs. They would just get dieback and then come back. But they worked at it.
And we have George Elvin's, I don't know what the relationship is, but maybe a great niece. She's here tonight too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.